Daniel Sports Central, we go over our 2022 college football predictions for the Alabama Crimson Tide, the team that barely missed out on winning a national championship in the 2021 season. This team made it to the national title and lost to Georgia, but this team is one of the clear favorites to win the title in the 2022 season, and there's reason to see why. That's what we'll be going over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predicting their schedule game by game here today, starting out with your team trends. Alabama 13-2 last season. Once again, outstanding season for this team. They were 6-1 in their first 7 games, and then 7-1 in their last 8. Some notable matchups last year. This team beat Ole Miss 42-21. Obviously, Ole Miss was a good team last season. 12th in the nation was what they were ranked at the time, and I mean overall they were one of the best teams in the SEC. So for Alabama to beat them by 3 touchdowns was obviously a huge win. They lost to Texas A&M though, 38-41. That was quite a matchup there in College Station on October 9th, and the Aggies ended up getting the win there on a field goal and won the game 41-38. But I will tell you that matchup in the 2022 season is going to be quite a matchup, especially considering the drama between Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher in the past couple of weeks. That's going to be very interesting to see that matchup in the 2022 season. But moving on, of course, they beat Auburn on the road 24-22. That game went into 4 overtimes. Yeah, that was quite a matchup. They beat Georgia in the SEC Championship 41-24. Beat Cincinnati in the College Football Playoff semifinal 27-6. But they lost to Georgia in the national title game 18-33. So the Bulldogs, it was their year. I mean, Georgia from start to finish, I would say, that SEC Championship game, Alabama played as the better team in that matchup, but Georgia all around, I would say, was the most dominant team in the nation last season, so a well-deserved title for them. But Alabama, this team, it could very well be their year in 2022. I feel like this team, last season they definitely had some experience last season and they had tremendous talent, but going into next season, you got Bryce Young coming back, the Heisman-winning quarterback, who was nothing short of outstanding last season. He put up over 4,800 yards, 47 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and a 67% completion rate. So, Bryce Young, he is an outstanding quarterback to say the least. And for him to come back for this team, that's going to be massive. He could put up some insane numbers next season, considering, this was just his first season as a full-time starting quarterback in college, and his touchdown interception ratio was 47-7, which is incredible. So Bryce Young coming back is obviously going to be huge. Brian Robinson, you do lose him. Last season he put up 1,600 yards, 16 touchdowns, so obviously a tough loss there. Jamison Williams is also taken off. Last season he put up nearly 1,600 yards and 15 touchdowns. So there are a couple of key losses. You lose your top running back, your top receiver. John Mechie is also gone, the second receiver on this team, who put up over 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns last season. But the thing is about Alabama is this team, even after the 2020 season, this team lost a lot. But the thing is that the Crimson Tide, this team is so outstanding with recruiting, plus, the amount of depth that is on this team right now is outstanding. So, this team, there's really nothing to be concerned about if you ask me. They got so much depth, and, even though you're obviously losing some key players and some very talented players, especially Brian Robinson and Jamison Williams, the depth is still outstanding for this team. You got Trey Sanders coming back, the second running back on this team last season. He really didn't have too big of an impact, 370 yards and 2 touchdowns, but still it's a return for this team. And you got Cameron Latu coming back, tight end, and third in receiving last season, put up 410 yards, 8 touchdowns. And then Slade Bolden is also coming back. Watch out for him to have a big impact next season. He put up 400 yards and 3 touchdowns on the season for the Crimson Tide. So you got them coming back. You also got Trey Sanders coming back in the backfield. Plus the recruiting looks fantastic. So I'm not too concerned. For any other team that didn't have, or if you didn't have much depth, it could be a concern not having Brian Robinson and Jamison Williams, even John Mechie not coming back. But once again, the depth on this team is outstanding. You lose 2 on the defensive line. Offensive line looks great going into next season. You lose linebacker Allen and then 2 defensive backs as well. So defensively, you lose a couple of key players for sure, but once again, still looks outstanding. They got some key losses, but once again, tremendous depth. National title favorite heading into 2022. Is this team the favorite to win the national title? I would say across the board, Alabama is the favorite by most analysts, by most websites, to be the national champion next season. And once again, there's reason to see why. This team, Bryce Young coming back, and the recruiting looks great. The depth is great. So, Alabama, this team, it's clear to see why this team is a favorite. But I would say for me, this team is probably the favorite as well to win the title, even though there's multiple other teams. Like, I mean, in the SEC, you got a few teams. I mean, Texas A&M, Georgia. I feel like Texas A&M is a team to really keep an eye on. Georgia, potentially, but I'm more confident picking Alabama over them for sure. Of course, Ohio State's also a team to keep an eye on as well. So, but I would say Alabama is probably my favorite going into next season. Transfer portal and recruiting going into next year as well. Jermaine Burton's coming in from Georgia, receiver. That's going to add to the depth of the receiving core. He was an impact player for Georgia last season, so we'll see how he does. He's definitely a name to keep an eye on. Eli Ricks, defensive backs coming in from LSU. Kamar Wheaton, a running back coming in from SMU. Billingsley, a tight ends off to Texas. You do lose a few players, but I mean, you do bring in some key players there with Ricks, Wheaton, and Burton, as well as you can't forget about Tyler Harrell coming in from Louisville. Billingsley, tight ends off to Texas. Shane Lee, linebackers off to USC. Javon Baker is off to Kentucky, and Kane Williams, safety, is off to Nebraska. Recruiting-wise, this team is number 2 in the nation, second in the SEC. Of course, Texas A&M is number 1 nationally and in the SEC, obviously. So, I mean, that's what started that controversy between and that conflict between Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher. That was just recent, so I don't know whenever you guys are watching this, that just happened here about a week ago. But yeah, that's definitely going to set up an interesting storyline for the Texas A&M Alabama game this upcoming season. For the Crimson Tide, they got 3 5-stars coming in and then 19 4-stars as well. So once again, another outstanding recruiting class for the Crimson Tide going into 2022. Here's your schedule going to next season. This team starts off the season against Utah State on September 3rd. You go on the road to Texas on September 10th. Obviously, a huge game there coming up in week 2, considering Texas is, I mean, so far in this offseason, I mean, Texas has been a team that has been ranked in the top 10 of multiple preseason rankings. Louisiana Monroe on the 17th, Vanderbilt at home on the 24th. Then you got Arkansas on the road on the 1st. Texas A&M is coming to town on the 8th. You got Tennessee on the road on the 15th. Mississippi State at home. LSU on the road. Ole Miss on the road. Then Austin Peay and Auburn both at home to finish off the season. So looking at your September here, Utah State, I'll say that's an easy win. Utah State is a decent team, but I don't think that they compare up to Alabama. Texas, that's going to be an interesting matchup. Obviously a rematch of a national title matchup about a decade ago. Should be a fun one. That's going to be a great matchup. But I feel like, I mean, Crimson Tide, I mean, I'm definitely going to favor the Crimson Tide in that matchup. I feel like Texas, they've got some good talent. They potentially could be maybe a contender next season. I don't know about a national contender for Texas, but definitely a Big 12 contender. But I mean, I feel like Texas is kind of a bit overrated in this offseason. I mean, Texas hasn't really done anything in a while, and they're in the top 10, top 7 for a lot of preseason rankings. I mean, they've got tremendous talent. They got some big-time talent for sure, but I don't think that Texas beats Alabama there. Louisiana Monroe, easy win. Vanderbilt, easy win as well. So you start off the season 4-0. Looking at October, you got Arkansas on the road on the 1st. That should be an interesting matchup. Arkansas should be a good team next season, but I do want to favor Alabama there in a close one. Texas A&M obviously is going to be one of the biggest games of the season here for the Crimson Tide. Alabama does have that game at home this year, which is going to give them obviously a huge advantage. Texas A&M is going to be good next season. That will be a good football team, but I do think Alabama in the end gets the win there in what is going to be an outstanding game. I can imagine that's going to be one of the best games of the season. Tennessee on the road, easy win, even though I consider putting that in yellow. And then Mississippi State, I'll put that one in green as an easy win there. So you start the season 8-0. And looking at your November, you got LSU on the road. I'm going to put that game in yellow just because I do think LSU puts up a fight in that one, but I definitely want to favor Alabama there. Ole Miss on the road, I'll put that one in green as an easy win. Ole Miss I don't think will be quite as good next season. Austin Peay, obviously an easy win. And then Auburn, I'll put that game in green as an easy win as well with it being at home. So Alabama, I got this team as a perfect 12-0 team next season. Definitely, they will be in the college football playoff. I would almost guarantee it next season. This team very much should be in the college football playoff, and I do feel like this team is, as I mentioned before, probably my favorite to win the national title. I mean, there are multiple teams that could win it next season, but Alabama is probably barely my favorite. This team just has got all the keys to success here. I mean, if you consider Bryce Young, obviously he's huge. The depth, the recruiting, it all fits in, and this team looks good going into next season. They look great going into next season. So 12-0 is my prediction. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this team, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.